Thank you very much, Michelle. That's great, and we're speaking to like different audiences here. We're speaking to a lot of some of the finance, public works kind of people, the people who have to report on their financial information returns and so forth. And we're also speaking to a lot of the people who actually deal with these assets and the environmental planners, and part of it sometimes really figuring out on reporting requirements what's similar, what's different, and what some of the challenges are. Um, for an example about how the City of London has approached this, I'd like to introduce Khaled Shahata, who will talk about how corporate asset management integrates green infrastructure. Khaled is the manager of corporate asset management at the City of London, Ontario. He's been with their program and really helped uh, driven it since 2011. The City of London has done a great job with that. Khaled has a PhD in construction management, and he's a professional engineer, and he's also an AM Ontario board member. And with that, I'll turn that over to Khaled.
Thank you, Chris. So let me share my screen. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can. And we can hear you fine.
Perfect. Okay, good morning, everyone. So what I'm going to try to cover in my slides is an overview of the corporate asset management program at the city, provide you an example of how we integrated green infrastructure assets in our asset management plan. And my example is going to focus on the stormwater management, parks and natural area, open spaces, and forestry. Of course, we have here today our urban forestry team who going to cover in a little bit more detail the stages of asset management planning that we went through. Then I'm going to conclude by providing an overview of integrating level of service and defining the level of service framework, which Sarah also going to cover how we develop the quality rating system for our urban forestry woodlands and integrated it in our asset management plan. So to start, this is our asset management program overview. We have a strategic plan. We have a policy that was developed in 2019. We have CAM strategy, which is outlining the details of how we're going to implement our asset management policy and asset management best practice in London. We developed our first CAM plan back in 2014, our second one meeting the regulation requirement in 2019. Then we are building our day-to-day processes as we speak for our asset management program for all the service area we have. There is a link to the video that summarize our asset management planning in the City of London. You can review that video. It's just outlines the things that we go through when we do asset management in London. So when we look into the scope of work of things that we have around 17 service areas that are directly owned by the city. So each one of those service areas have a section in our asset management plan, and those sections are consistent, speaking about the state of infrastructure, level of service, life cycle management, whether we have an infrastructure gap or not, discussion and conclusion. Then we have an overall financial strategy to address whether we have an infrastructure gap, how to close the infrastructure gap that we defined in there. So if you look into this diagram, it outlines the type of assets we currently have as part of our scope in the asset management plan, and we updated that last year, 2020. We have around 21 billion worth of infrastructure as part of our plan, and we color-coded them here from very good to very poor, and we indicated where each one of those service area stands. Overall, the condition of our assets is good, even though we still have some assets in poor and very poor, but the overall condition of our assets is good, which is a really good thing. So Michelle was able to provide us with an introduction about the definition of green infrastructure. And she did a great job explaining them. In this slide, I'm just summarizing them the same way she did. There is natural assets like wetland, forests, fields, and soil. There is enhanced assets like rain gardens, bioswales, urban trees. And there is engineered assets like permeable pavement, green roofs, green walls as part of our green infrastructure inventories. So what we have done, we looked at the definition in London about the green infrastructure, and we started looking into our data and deciding, do we have enough information to integrate it in our asset management plan or not? So when we started asking ourselves this question, we divided those into different buckets. So the first group is information that we have inventory and replacement value for those type of assets. For example, stormwater facilities, the parks and natural areas, urban forestry, bioretention swales, engineered wetland, infiltration basins, and dry wells. Those are things that we were able to identify inventory and replacement value, and I'm going to speak in high level how we came up with the replacement value for them. Then we have other assets that we're not able to identify both inventory and replacement value, so we're able to identify inventory only. An example of that are the natural wetland, rivers and creek, and soils. We were not able to put a replacement value in there, so we put it in the future that we would calculate that for them. Then we have some that we don't have inventory. We don't know really if we have them or not. We hear talks that yes, we may have green roofs somewhere, but it's not really captured or documented. So we said, okay, let's identify those as something that we would investigate in the future in the next asset management plan update. So the key thing is we started with what we have and we said, yes, our information may not be perfect, but let's put it together in a document and summarize what we have. And we struggled a little bit about how or where should we put the information together. So should it be under open conveyance like municipal drains, channels, or it could be under stormwater management facilities. And we came up with a group called green stormwater green infrastructure, for example, that have infiltration basin, bioretention swales, and rain gardens. Engineered wetland, which is an enhanced type of green infrastructure, is grouped under stormwater management facilities. So to give you an example of the scope of work we have around, in stormwater, for example, that's what I'm going to start with, we have around 460,000 worth of infrastructure, 460 million, sorry. In green infrastructure, there is around 11 million worth in replacement value. You can see here open conveyance. When we look into the condition, 50% of them, we don't know the replacement value. We don't have the condition information assessed for them because drains and rivers and ditches, we didn't have that. We outlined that we are missing this information in our asset management plan to improve it in the future. When you look deep into the green infrastructure categories like the wetland, bioretention, dry wells, we have around 32 million worth of infrastructure, and the majority of them are in good condition. They're fairly new, they're fairly recent, fairly recently developed in our program. Then we move into urban forestry and parks and trees. So trees is completely different than our gray infrastructure. They appreciate with time, and the value of an old or 50 centimeter diameter tree compared to a 25 centimeter diameter tree is twice as much in terms of benefit, or even much more. So I cannot say that if I'm going to replace a 100 centimeter diameter tree with one 10 centimeter diameter tree, because that's a new one that you can get, I'm getting equivalent benefits. That's not true. So that was one of the discussion points that triggered us to look into different ways to evaluate those assets and come up with our replacement value for our trees in a different way. There is lots of information that's going to be covered in today's session about valuation, so I'm not going to go into details into that, but I just wanted to highlight that we have two approaches that we use our valuation for trees. The first is based on the diameter of the tree and how many trees going to replace the existing diameter of trees that we have. So that's one approach, and it came up with around 321 million worth of replacement value for our trees. Another way is for our woodland, and the way we looked at our woodland, we don't have a tree inventory for each single tree in the woodland. So we assumed a number of tree per hectare, and we got a replacement value per the hectare, multiplied those together, we came up with a total replacement value of around 81 million for our woodlands. This slide and the previous slide provide a little bit details about how we did the calculation, but in the workshop later this afternoon, later this morning, we're gonna go through those calculation in details to understand how we came with our replacement value. So, looking into our urban forestry valuation, we have around 402 million overall in street trees and the manicured park trees, the parks that we have, manicured portion of the park that we have trees, we have around 321 million. And in the woodland, we have 81 million worth of trees over there. Those are our starting point for doing our life cycle management and our integration in asset management plan. So once we understood the inventory, once we understood the condition information, we were able to move forward to level of service. And this slide shows that we have assessed the majority of our condition for our woodland trees and street trees and manicured park trees. Only 12%, we didn't assess them yet. And when Sarah goes through her presentation, she's gonna explain the procedure we went through to come up with our quality rating system. So this is the inventory and valuation section of our asset management plan. Now let's move into the level of service. And level of service is very important step. As Chris mentioned, the regulation is asking us to do an asset management plan, and this asset management plan has a level of service component to it. They provide guidance into what are the measures we need to have for gray infrastructure. They didn't provide guidance in terms of what measures we need to have in our green infrastructure, but we follow the same approach. There is a community or customer level of service type, and there is a technical type of metric that we need to have over there. So in London, we have our framework for developing our level of service like that. We have a line of sight between our strategic plan and our technical level of service operation. So you can see here, we start with the city vision, mission, values. Then we come up with customer values from those missions and value statement around something like quality, reliability, cost efficiency, safety, and environmental stewardship. Those are some customer values that we categorize under them our objective, corporate level of service objective. Then we have different customer level of service measures, and under each one of them, we may have one or more technical level of service measures available. So look into this approach. Those are the key customer values we develop, like customer service, public education, efficient, quality. And you look in here, there are some examples of what we include under each one of those categories. The one that I want to focus your attention on are the basic one that most of you may start with is, for example, reliability, where you have your condition information captured or grouped under this category, and quality, where we have some quality rating system. What is the value we are getting out of using this green infrastructure assets as a starting point for developing your level of service. This is an example of our level of service metric that we have in our asset management plan for parks. And you can see the average park linear pathway level of service quality rating system is captured over here, the percent of visitors that we have. So we put some examples of what metrics we have. We have our current performance and our target performance established over there in our level of service framework. This is the steps that we went through to develop this level of service. First one is develop the baseline, develop those preliminary metrics that, if you can call them, understand what is the base model for us. Then we move into stage 2, where we do a periodic review and we do an update for our metrics every year. We assess the actual versus the target that we have. Then in the future implementation, we haven't moved to stage 3 yet, where we're going to start including public engagement, linking each one of those metrics to the financial component. Right now, we only have 1 or 2 metrics linked to financial, like condition of some of the assets that we have. But we want to expand that in the future to meet the proposed level of service regulation requirement in 2023 or 2024 deadline of the regulation. So what we have done is something like that. We look into all the service area that we have, and we assess whether they are meeting the target or not. And if we look into urban forestry, cost efficient, and some of them we are not. Safety, we may or may not meeting them. And the reason that we have a huge infrastructure gap for our urban forestry, we define that we need to invest a little bit more money in our green infrastructure. So this is a way to show whether we are meeting our objectives or not over the upcoming 10 years. Another thing we have done is looking into the asset condition as a way of developing our level of service. So, and this slide I'm showing you over here, this is showing different examples. If we maintain, for example, our current funding, what's the overall condition of our assets gonna be? And if we wanna project it over 10 years, what's gonna be our condition information if we reduce our budget, if we increase our budget, or we fix everything. And then we can provide different scenarios for our council and senior leadership team to decide which approach is more appropriate for us to invest on and be sustainable in the future. So in our asset management plan, for the majority of our assets, including green infrastructure, we have diagrams like that, where we are showing this is the current level of service, the overall condition of our assets, using our current budget over the next 20 years. Then we provide an optimal budget scenario. What is the required amount to sustain the current level of service? And we provide an overall condition profile for that. As you can see, the more red you see in your graph in 20 years, it means the assets in poor condition, you have a huge or higher infrastructure gap. The less red in there, or the more green in there, it means that your assets are in fair or good condition. That's really how we communicate. We use only one metric to generate those graphs, which is condition. Our hope is to expand that for green and gray infrastructure for other level of service metric, not only condition. With that, I think that summarizes our journey with our asset management program for green infrastructure. I put here some list of references so you can go to and check the information that we have under those slides. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Chris.